The alley was eerily quiet, bathed in the dim orange glow of a flickering streetlight. A stray dog, with a coat matted from years of neglect, sniffed through the trash pile near the corner. Its ribs jutted out sharply, but it moved with purpose, driven by hunger and instinct. Suddenly, a faint, muffled cry broke the stillness of the night. The dog froze, ears perked, its head cocked to one side, as if unsure of what it had just heard. The sound came again, weak, almost lost beneath the rustle of plastic bags. The dog trotted toward the source of the noise, its paws crunching softly on broken glass and discarded wrappers. It began pawing at a mound of garbage, pushing aside torn cardboard and crumpled cans. The cries grew louder. With one final dig, the dog uncovered a small, fragile bundle wrapped in a grimy, torn blanket. Two tiny hands poked out, trembling. The baby's face was pale, its lips tinged with blue, and its cries were faint, barely more than a whimper. The dog sniffed the baby cautiously, its wet nose brushing against the infant's cold skin. It barked once, a sharp, urgent sound that echoed down the alley. It barked again, louder, as if calling for help, but the street remained lifeless and still. The dog lowered its head, nudging the baby gently, and let out a soft whine. Then, as though understanding the gravity of the moment, it carefully picked up the baby's blanket in its teeth. The cries quieted slightly as the dog began to walk, its steps deliberate, its eyes scanning the streets ahead. The stray had no home, no family, and no plan. But that night, it carried a purpose. The dog stood in the middle of the alley, the baby bundled in a tattered blanket before it. The cries were softer now, barely audible over the faint hum of the city in the distance. The dog's tail wagged nervously, and it barked again, a desperate, echoing call for help. But no one came. The dog paced around the baby, its sharp eyes scanning the empty street. It nudged the baby with its nose, whining softly as though trying to comfort it. For a moment, the dog hesitated, unsure of what to do. Then, it looked toward the faint glow of lights in the distance. With a low whimper, the dog crouched down, grabbed the edge of the baby's blanket carefully between its teeth, and lifted the fragile bundle. The baby let out a weak cry, but the dog held firm, its grip gentle yet secure. It took a few tentative steps, the weight of its decision seeming heavier than the bundle it carried. The dog paused and looked back at the alley, its usual refuge from the harshness of the streets. Then it turned forward, resolute. Dodging trash bins and broken glass, the dog navigated its way out of the alley. A car sped past on the main road, its headlights briefly illuminating the determined stray and the precious bundle it carried. The dog stopped, waited for the road to clear, then darted across to the other side. It sniffed the air, picking up familiar scents. A memory stirred. Somewhere nearby, there was a house where a kind woman had once given it scraps of food. The dog adjusted its course, heading toward that faint glimmer of hope, the baby's cries urging it forward. This wasn't just survival anymore. The dog had made its decision. It was no longer searching for food. It was searching for salvation. The dog padded through the dimly lit streets, its head held high as it carefully carried the baby. The city was alive with faint sounds, distant car engines, the hum of a neon sign, and the occasional bark of another stray. Yet, in the shadowy corners of the urban maze, the dog's journey was perilous. It paused at the edge of a busy intersection, its ears flicking back as headlights flashed by. Cars roared past, the gusts of air ruffling the dog's matted fur. The baby let out a soft cry, and the dog crouched low, shielding the bundle from the noise and the light. When the road fell silent for a brief moment, the dog darted across, its paws slipping slightly on the cold asphalt. On the other side, It took refuge behind a row of dumpsters, its chest rising and falling quickly. As it pressed on, the dog passed a group of men gathered near a street corner. They were loud, laughing and talking, their cigarette smoke curling into the night air. One of them glanced at the dog and muttered, "What's that thing carrying?" But before anyone could investigate, the dog disappeared into the shadows, quick and determined. Farther down the road, the dog approached a police station. The glow of the sign seemed promising. It scratched at the door with its paw, barked once, then again. A sleepy officer glanced out but dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Just another stray," he muttered, shutting the blinds. The dog whined softly but didn't linger. It adjusted the blanket in its jaws and continued forward, heading toward the faint scent of familiarity. The city was a labyrinth, but the dog was relentless. It crossed alleys filled with broken bottles, evaded the snapping jaws of another stray, and even braved a narrow path beside a rushing canal. Each step seemed guided by a sense of duty stronger than its fear. Finally, the dog spotted the warm glow of a house where it had once been fed. A small, modest home with light spilling out from the windows. The dog's pace quickened, its resolve unshaken. It reached the porch and gently placed the baby down, pawing and barking frantically at the door. Its journey through the unforgiving city was over, but its mission was far from complete. Now, it was up to the humans inside. Inside the cozy, dimly lit house, the nurse sat on the couch with a book in her lap, the soft hum of classical music filling the room. The rhythmic sound of rain tapping against the window was interrupted by frantic scratching and barking at the front door. She frowned and got up, cautiously peeking through the peephole. All she could see was a scruffy stray dog on her porch, its eyes wide with urgency. It barked again, scratching at the door with its paw. "What's wrong, boy?" she muttered, opening the door slightly. Before she could fully step out, her gaze fell on the bundle lying on the ground. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the tiny hand poking out from the dirty blanket. The dog barked again and nudged the bundle with its nose, as if urging her to act. "Oh my God!" she gasped, kneeling to inspect the bundle. She pulled the blanket back and froze. A pale, fragile baby lay inside, its chest rising and falling faintly with shallow breaths. Its cries were weak, almost inaudible. Without hesitation, the nurse scooped the baby into her arms. "You poor thing, what happened to you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The dog followed her inside, watching closely as she laid the baby on the couch and grabbed her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed for an ambulance. "This is an emergency," she said, her voice firm. "I have an abandoned baby, cold, malnourished, but alive. Please send help quickly." As she hung up, the dog whined and sat beside the couch, its eyes fixed on the baby. The nurse grabbed a soft towel and wrapped it around the infant, gently rubbing its tiny hands to bring warmth. "You brought this baby here, didn't you?" she said, glancing at the dog. It wagged its tail once, as if understanding. Minutes later, paramedics arrived, rushing into the house. The nurse explained the situation as they checked the baby's vitals and transferred it into an incubator. "You probably saved this baby's life," one of them said, nodding at the nurse. She looked at the dog, whose tail wagged again, slower this time. "No," she said, a small smile forming. "He did." The dog followed them to the ambulance door but stopped as they drove away. It turned back to the nurse, who knelt down and stroked its head. "You're staying with me from now on," she said softly. The dog barked once, its eyes bright with relief. The intervention had saved more than one life that night. It forged a bond of hope and trust that neither the dog nor the nurse could have expected. The ambulance sped through the city streets, its siren piercing the quiet night. Inside, the baby lay in an incubator, its tiny chest rising and falling unevenly. The paramedics worked swiftly, attaching monitors to track its heart rate and oxygen levels. The nurse, who had insisted on accompanying the baby, sat nearby, clutching her hands tightly. She kept glancing at the baby, her medical training barely holding her panic at bay. "Temperature's dangerously low," one paramedic said, adjusting the incubator's settings. "Heart rate's weak too," added another, frowning at the monitor. The nurse leaned forward. "Do whatever it takes to stabilize the baby. It's been exposed for too long." They pulled into the hospital, where a team of doctors and nurses were already waiting. The baby was rushed into the pediatric emergency unit. The nurse followed closely, briefing the team on everything she knew about the situation. Inside the brightly lit ER, the baby was connected to a series of machines. Warm IV fluids were started, oxygen masks were placed over its tiny face, and a heat lamp was brought in to raise its body temperature. "Malnourished," the lead doctor muttered as he examined the baby. "We'll need to run tests for any infections or complications. Good thing it got here when it did." Hours passed in tense silence. The nurse stayed in the waiting area, her eyes red from tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. The dog, left behind at her house, was on her mind too, but her focus remained on the fragile life fighting to survive inside the hospital. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling down his mask with a tired but hopeful expression. "The baby's stable," he said. "It's weak and will need care, but it's out of immediate danger." Relief washed over the nurse, and she sank into her chair. "Thank you," she whispered. The doctor paused. "If that stray dog hadn't brought the baby to you, we might have had a very different outcome. It's a miracle." The nurse nodded, her thoughts drifting to the dog that had somehow understood the urgency of the situation. She made a mental note to tell the world this story, not just of the baby's survival, but of the unlikely hero who saved its life. The baby, now safe and recovering in the hospital, became the focus of media attention. News outlets picked up the heartwarming story of the stray dog that had carried the baby to safety, labeling the animal a hero. Yet, one burning question remained. Who had abandoned the baby? The police launched an investigation immediately. Officers began by searching the area where the dog had found the baby, combing through the trash heap for clues. Among the refuse, they discovered a small, crumpled note written in shaky handwriting. It read, "I'm sorry, I can't care for it." Using nearby security cameras, the authorities pieced together a timeline. Grainy footage from a local shop's CCTV showed a shadowy figure carrying a bundle to the alley late at night. The person paused, looking around nervously, before placing the baby in the trash and disappearing into the darkness. The footage was enhanced, revealing a clearer image of the figure. A woman in her early 20s, wearing a tattered coat. She appeared distressed, glancing over her shoulder repeatedly as if afraid of being seen. The police shared the image with local shelters and community organizations, hoping someone would recognize her. A break came when a social worker identified the woman as a young mother named Sarah, who had recently lost her job and was living in a nearby homeless encampment. When officers found Sarah, she was huddled under a tarp, clutching an old photograph of herself and the baby. Tears streamed down her face as she was questioned. She broke down and confessed. "I didn't want to abandon my baby," she sobbed. I couldn't see any other way. I thought someone might find him in time." The officers, moved by her desperation, contacted social services instead of pressing charges. Sarah was taken into care and provided with counseling and resources. The story, once framed as a tragedy, began to shift toward hope. with proper support, Sarah expressed a desire to reunite with her baby. However, the courts would have the final say, balancing the baby's well-being with Sarah's recovery. Meanwhile, the stray dog that had saved the baby's life became a local hero. News outlets shared its story far and wide, and offers to adopt it poured in. The nurse who had first helped the baby decided to keep the dog herself, naming it Guardian. The truth revealed not just one life saved, but a broken system that needed mending. The dog's actions had not only saved the baby, but had also given its mother a second chance at life. Weeks turned into months, and the once fragile baby was now thriving in the warmth of a loving foster home. The nurse who had taken in the stray dog, now named Guardian, visited often, bringing treats for the baby and the dog alike. The child's laugh filled the home, a sound that seemed to heal everyone who heard it. Meanwhile, Sarah, the baby's biological mother, was making strides in her recovery. With the help of social workers and counselors, she found steady employment and a safe place to live. After months of therapy and proving her dedication to change, she was granted supervised visits with her baby. During their first meeting, Sarah couldn't hold back tears as she held the child she thought she had lost forever. The foster parents, moved by her sincerity, agreed to work with her toward eventual reunification. As for Guardian, the stray-turned hero, life had never been better. The nurse ensured the dog was healthy, happy, and loved. Every time she visited the foster home, Guardian would run straight to the baby's crib, wagging its tail and licking the baby's tiny hand. The story of the dog's heroism inspired countless people. Donations poured into local shelters, and adoption rates for stray animals soared. News stations revisited the story, showing clips of the now happy baby playing with Guardian. In one particularly touching moment, Sarah, the foster parents, the baby, and the nurse all met for a picnic in the park. Guardian chased butterflies while the baby crawled on the blanket, giggling uncontrollably. The adults sat together, sharing smiles and stories, united by the extraordinary events that had brought them together. The once abandoned baby now had an entire community of love and support, a mother on the path to redemption, and a loyal dog who had changed everyone's lives. As the sun set over the park, Guardian lay beside the baby, the two inseparable. It was a picture of pure peace, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and kindness can prevail. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. Inside the foster home, the baby was sound asleep in its crib, its tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. A soft lullaby played in the background, blending with the faint chirping of crickets outside. In the corner of the room, Guardian lay curled up on a soft bed of its own, its eyes half closed but still alert. Every so often, it glanced toward the crib, as if ensuring its little charge was safe. Downstairs, the nurse sat with Sarah and the foster parents at the kitchen table, sharing stories over cups of tea. Laughter bubbled up as they reflected on how one stray dog had brought them all together, changing their lives forever. "I owe everything to that dog," Sarah said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Guardian didn't just save my baby, it gave me a second chance." The foster parents nodded in agreement. "This little one has a bright future now, thanks to all of us coming together." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a gentle glow over the yard. The faint sound of children playing in the distance faded as the night deepened. The camera pulls back slowly, revealing the peaceful home, the soft hum of life inside, and the loyal dog keeping watch. The story of hardship, resilience, and unexpected heroism had come full circle, leaving behind a legacy of hope and unity. The screen fades to black as a simple message appears. Sometimes, heroes come in the most unexpected forms. Cherish life and never underestimate the power of love and kindness.